Alright, so what I wanted to conclude with was a discussion about AutoCAD's degrees. Right now it's measuring in decimal degrees, and by default it's set to the nearest degree. And honestly, that's not very helpful. And the reason that becomes an issue is you're going to ask AutoCAD sometimes, what angle am I working at? And if this is not set correctly, you can get some bad information. So as an example, let me turn on this button down here. It's called dynamic mode or dynamic input. Some students like drawing with this because while you're working on the screen, it gives you some buttons to work with. Right? And you get some feedback on the screen. It's telling me the length of the line. It's telling me the angle of the line. Right? It's giving me the polar coordinate. So this looks like a good deal, right? Except when I look at the angle measurement, I see that it's saying even if I go outside of the polar angle, it's telling me 37, 36, 35, right? It's giving me a whole number, and we should know from AutoCAD that you can't be precise with your eye. There's no way in Hades that's exactly 26 degrees. But AutoCAD right now is set to show you degrees to the nearest degree. As an example here, I'm going to So as an example, I have a line here, and 1 degree away from it is a second line. So that's a single degree. And what I want you to see is that AutoCAD's going to lie to you if you don't set up your units correctly. So what does that mean? Well, it means that right now it's saying that is 66 degrees. And right now it's saying that that line is 67 degrees. But look what's happening in the middle here. Do you see how it's still saying 66 even though I'm getting smaller and smaller and smaller? Yeah, so what's it doing? Well, it's rounding. When we get to a certain point here, it rounds up. Right? And even if we go past 67 degrees, it's still saying 67 because it's rounding up. So understand that your feedback on the screen, whether it's down here in the coordinate display or on the screen, if you're using dynamic input, which some people like, is dependent on the units you're set to. So when you're rounding to the nearest degree, don't imagine it's going to be precise, because it's not. What if I jack that up to the nearest thousandth? If I go to the nearest thousandth, we're going to see a different story now as I go in here. Right? See, that's not exactly 65, is it? It's a little bit off. And right now I'm getting feedback that's much more accurate than before. As I move up, do you see how we're getting thousandths of a degree? Right, and the other one said 67 for this line, but we're nowhere near 67. It's just that it was 66.7, so it rounded it up. So what I want you to see is that units are important, especially when you're expecting an answer from AutoCAD, and if it's not set to the right precision, you're going to get a wrong answer. Decimal units for length, architectural units for length, these are probably the two we're going to use most of the time in class, and there's nothing wrong with fractional if we're working on something that's using fractions and you want to get your feedback in fractions. For degrees, most of the time in this class we're going to work with decimal degrees because we're just more comfortable with them. But AutoCAD does have several other systems for recording angles or reporting angles, degrees, minutes, and seconds. 1 degree, we all know what a degree is. Well, if you weren't aware of this, in mapping and civil engineering and surveying, degrees are broken into minutes, not decimal fractions. And minutes are broken into seconds. So degrees 360 in a circle, minutes, 60 minutes to a degree, seconds, 60 seconds to a minute. There's radians, if you're measuring angles in radians. I don't, but some do. And then surveyor's units, if you're working with bearing, that would give you a degree with whole degrees, minutes, and seconds, along with the direction it's traveling in. So these are some of your angle settings in the units box. We can leave it on decimal. You can move it to a comfortable setting, and then we are good to go. I turned on the dynamic input down here. Some people like dynamic input. They like that feedback on the screen. Personally, drives me nuts, makes my computer run slower. I'm not a fan, so I usually turn it off. And the other thing to keep in mind is that if you have this button turned on, dynamic input, and you want to work with coordinates, you're going to get some wacky results that might not be what you want. So, for example, if I say, hey, draw me a line from 0, 0, and then my next point will be 1, 0, and then I want to go straight up 1 inch. So, right, that's 1 inch over and 1 inch up. So that should be coordinate 1, 1, right? But if you have dynamic input turned on and you type in 1, 1, look what it does. You see how it didn't go here to the absolute location? It went from your last point 1 over and 1 up. So when dynamic input is on, if you type things in the way you learn in the B12 class, you're going to get relative input. So how do we fix that or undo that? Well, if you type a hashtag 1, 1, well, then it goes back to the old style of absolute coordinates that you're familiar with. So again, if you like dynamic input, work with it. Personally, I don't like it very much. The correct way to work with it, if you haven't used it much in the past, is once you start drawing, you see how the box for the length is in blue? Well, if you type a number, like 1, see that number just appeared in the box. And then if you hit Tab, well, that goes to the next box, which has the angle. And if you type into there and hit Enter, you'll get your 1 inch long, 45-degree angle. I'll do another line, 1 inch long, Tab. This time I'll set it to 0, right? And it'll go straight to the right. And if you keep tabbing back and forth, you can go back and forth between those fields. And notice how they're locked once you type in your number and hit Tab. But you can't go back and forth to adjust them if that's what you need to do. So this is the correct way to work with dynamic input. 1, Tab, 275, angle. One Tab, 270. Now the other thing to think about or understand is that depending on if you're going up or down, the angle might not be the same polar angle that you're used to working with either, because AutoCAD, when dynamic is on, measures 180 degrees this way and then 180 negative degrees that way. So it can be a little frustrating, but once you get the hang of working with dynamic input, it's not as bad as you might think it is. Some things that we want to do when we start a brand new file. Okay. The very first thing you need to do is you need to set your units, right? If we're working with feet and inches, and you go to type in feet any time after now, but you're set for decimal, it's not going to accept that. So the first thing you should do every time you start a brand new file is set your units. Then the second thing you should do is you should set your limits. The bottom left corner is always 0, 0, and then the top right corner will be the limit that you specify. Again, if you wanted to use feet and inches, if I said limits, 0, 0, bottom left, 10 feet, comma, 7 feet, I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to say, what are you talking about? I don't understand what you just said. Invalid 2D point. Well, it doesn't understand because my units are in decimal when they need to be in architectural if I want to use feet. All right, so if I set the units first, then no matter what I type in afterward, 0, 0 for my bottom left, 10 feet, comma, 7 feet, enter. Well, you see now it does accept that. So units first, limits second, LA, layers third. Make all your layers before you start drawing. Does it make sense to draw the whole drawing on layer 0, and then at the end make the layers and then start putting your geometry on those layers? That's backwards, so don't do that. After the layers are made, next thing would be go in and make your text. What kind of text styles are you going to use in the drawing? There's no reason to put all your text on the standard layer and then at the end go back in and change it to the layers that you want. It's just boneheaded to do it that way. Okay, make the styles that you need and then go back, and then as you're working, set it to the style you want. And then once those 4 steps are complete, well, then you can start drawing. So for us, the order would be units, limits, layers, text styles, and then get to work.